My parents threatened to skip my wedding if I don't invite their favorite cousin. Weddings are supposed to be a time of joy and celebration, but right now, I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of a family battlefield. My fiancé, Ryan, 30, Emmy, and I, 29F, are getting married in a few months, and we've been carefully planning our guest list to make sure it reflects the people who truly matter to us. It's not a massive wedding, around 100 people, and we're paying for most of it ourselves, which means we've had to make some tough decisions about who to invite. Everything was going smoothly until my parents dropped a bombshell. They demanded that I invite their favorite cousin, Aunt Linda, to the wedding. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Aunt Linda. She's not actually my aunt, but my mom's cousin, and while my parents adore her, I've never been close to her. In fact, the last time I saw her was probably over 5 years ago at a family reunion, and even then, we exchanged maybe 2 sentences. Aunt Linda has a reputation in the family for being, well, difficult. She's the type of person who dominates conversations, criticizes everything, and makes passive-aggressive comments about people's life choices. She's also known for causing drama at events. She once got into a shouting match with another relative at a wedding over something trivial. Ryan and I both agreed that she wasn't someone we wanted at our wedding, especially since we're trying to keep the guest list intimate. When I explained this to my parents, they didn't take it well. They argued that Aunt Linda is family, and that not inviting her would be seen as a huge insult. My mom even said, "If you don't invite her, it's like you're rejecting your entire family." My dad chimed in, saying that Linda has always been supportive of them, and that they owe her this courtesy. I stood my ground and told them that this is our wedding, not theirs, and that Ryan and I have the final say on the guest list. I thought that would be the end of it, but then they escalated things. A few days later, my mom called me and said, "If you're not going to invite Linda, then maybe your father and I shouldn't come either." I was floored. I never expected my parents to use such an extreme tactic to get their way. Ryan has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. He reminded me that this day is about us, not about pleasing everyone else. Still, I can't help but feel torn. The idea of my parents not being at my wedding is heartbreaking, but at the same time, I don't want to give in to their ultimatum. To make matters worse, word seems to have gotten out to other family members. My mom must have told someone because I've started getting calls and messages from relatives asking why I'm excluding Aunt Linda. Some have been understanding when I explain the situation, but others have said things like, "It's just one more person. Why not keep the peace?" But it's not just about one more person. It's about the principle. This is supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, and I don't want to spend it worrying about what drama Aunt Linda might stir up. I'm at a crossroads right now. Do I stand firm and risk alienating my parents and causing a rift in the family? Or do I give in, invite Aunt Linda, and deal with the consequences just to keep the peace? I could really use some advice. Have any of you been in a situation like this? How did you handle it? Am I being unreasonable for wanting to prioritize my happiness on my wedding day? Update 1. Thank you to everyone who shared advice and support after my original post. Reading your comments helped me feel less alone in this mess. I wish I could say things have improved since then, but unfortunately, the drama has only escalated. After my last conversation with my parents, I decided to hold my ground. I explained again that Ryan and I carefully chose our guest list based on the people who have been an active part of our lives. I emphasized that Aunt Linda simply doesn't fit into that category and that our decision wasn't meant to hurt anyone. I thought approaching it calmly and logically might work. It didn't. My mom responded by doubling down. She told me that Aunt Linda had always been there for her, especially during some rough times in her life, and that excluding Linda would feel like a betrayal. Then she hit me with this gem. "If you can't make this small compromise for us, maybe we need to rethink our relationship." That stung. I couldn't believe my own mother was essentially threatening to cut me off emotionally because of one wedding guest. My dad, usually the more level-headed of the two, wasn't much better. He said, "If you're willing to alienate family over something as trivial as this, maybe we've raised you wrong." At this point, I felt like I was being ganged up on. It wasn't just my parents anymore. Word had spread to more family members. I started getting calls from cousins, aunts, and uncles, all urging me to do the right thing and invite Aunt Linda. Some were kind about it, but others weren't. One cousin told me I was being selfish and accused me of forgetting my roots. The pressure was suffocating. Ryan suggested we take a step back and reconsider whether this fight was worth the stress it was causing us. I understood where he was coming from, but the idea of caving felt wrong. This wasn't just about Aunt Linda anymore. It was about setting boundaries and not letting others dictate our choices for such an important day. Then, things took an even worse turn. My mom called me one evening and said that Aunt Linda had heard about the situation. According to my mom, Linda was devastated and couldn't understand why she wasn't invited. Linda apparently said, "I've always been nothing but kind to me, and now she's treating me like I don't exist." My mom claimed that Linda was crying over it, which I find hard to believe considering Linda's usual tough-as-nails demeanor. I stood my ground once again and said, "Mom, I'm sorry if Linda is upset, but this decision isn't about her. It's about what Ryan and I want for our wedding. I'm not going to change my mind." That's when my mom dropped the ultimate bombshell. "If Linda isn't invited, your father and I won't be coming to your wedding." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. I had always envisioned my parents being there on my wedding day, walking me down the aisle and celebrating this huge milestone in my life. Now, they were essentially holding their attendance hostage to get their way. I asked them if this was really the hill they wanted to die on. "You'd seriously miss your own child's wedding over a guest list decision?" My mom replied, "It's not just about the guest list. It's about family loyalty and respect." After that conversation, I felt completely drained. Ryan has been my rock through all of this, reminding me that we're building our own family now, and that we need to do what's best for us. Still, I can't shake the sadness and frustration of knowing my parents might not be there on one of the most important days of my life. For now, I've decided not to engage further with my parents about this. If they want to boycott my wedding over Aunt Linda, that's their choice. I refuse to compromise on something so fundamental to my happiness. I'll keep you all updated if anything changes, but right now I'm just focusing on Ryan and our plans for the wedding. Thank you for reading and for being a source of support during this difficult time. Update 2. After the dust settled from my last conversation with my parents, I decided to focus on planning my wedding with Ryan. I wasn't going to let their threats and guilt trips ruin this joyful time in our lives. However, the situation continued to escalate, and it brought some surprising twists. A few days after my last update, I received a long email from my dad. It wasn't the apology I'd hoped for, but rather an attempt to justify their stance. He said things like, "Family is everything," and accused me of being blinded by selfishness and under Ryan's influence. It felt like a betrayal, that they were now blaming my fiancé for my decision, as if I wasn't capable of making up my own mind. The email ended with an ultimatum. "If you don't invite Aunt Linda, don't expect us to show up, and don't expect us to support you in the future." That sentence solidified things for me. If they were willing to cut ties over something so small, then maybe their support wasn't as unconditional as I once thought. I responded with a short but firm email. "Dad, I love you and Mom, but I will not be manipulated or guilted into changing my wedding plans. If you choose not to come, I'll be heartbroken, but that's your decision to make. I hope you'll reconsider and choose to support me on my big day." After I sent the email, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I knew I had done the right thing, but it hurt to think that my own parents might not be there to celebrate with me. Then, the most unexpected thing happened. Aunt Linda called me. I was bracing myself for an argument or a guilt trip, but to my surprise, Linda sounded calm. She said she had heard about the drama and wanted to clear the air. "Look, I'm not offended that I wasn't invited," she said. "It's your wedding, and you have every right to decide who's there. I don't know why your parents are making such a big deal out of this." I was stunned. For weeks, my parents had painted Linda as this deeply hurt, wronged family member. Yet here she was, telling me she didn't even care about attending. She went on to say that she never asked my parents to advocate for her, and had even told them to drop it. "I'm sorry they're putting you through this," Linda said. "If it helps, I'll call them and tell them to back off." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved to know Linda wasn't holding a grudge. On the other hand, I was furious at my parents for misrepresenting the situation and using Linda as an excuse to control my wedding. True to her word, Linda called my parents, but it didn't have the effect I'd hoped for. Instead of admitting they were wrong, my mom called me later that evening, furious. "How dare you go behind our backs and involve Linda?" she shouted. "You've embarrassed us and made this even worse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom," Linda called me. "She's not upset, and she told me she never asked you to do this. Why are you still making this a problem?" My mom sputtered something about how it was the principle of the matter and accused me of turning the family against her. At that point, I realized there was no reasoning with her. The final straw came when I received a group text from my parents sent to several other family members accusing me of being disrespectful and tearing the family apart. They claimed they were being forced to skip my wedding because I refused to compromise. The text was clearly meant to paint me as the villain and gain sympathy from the extended family. Luckily, many of my relatives saw through it. A few even reached out to express their support, saying they understood my position and didn't agree with how my parents were handling things. Their messages reminded me that not everyone in my family was against me. As of now, my parents are still sticking to their ultimatum. Ryan and I have decided to move forward with our plans, regardless of whether they choose to come. It's painful, but I refuse to let their behavior overshadow what should be one of the happiest days of my life. I've also taken steps to protect my peace by limiting contact with my parents for the time being. I hope they'll eventually come around, but I've accepted that their attendance isn't something I can control. To everyone who shared advice and kind words after my first update, thank you. You've helped me stay strong and reminded me that setting boundaries is not selfish. I'll post another update if anything changes, but for now, I'm focusing on the people who truly support us. What do you think? Was I right to stand my ground, or should I have handled things differently?